It is your Friday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day and hope everyone is having a great day out there as well as we head into the weekend. And a great weekend it should be. Looks like sun, warm, get outside in the water maybe, do some fun summer stuff. Before that, though, let's listen to this show. Let's do this show. Ben Goessling from the Tribune joins me here in just a few minutes. Talk Vikings. It's been a heavy week for the Vikings, culminating today with the funeral for Khyree Jackson, the rookie cornerback who was killed tragically in a car accident earlier this month. A lot of Vikings coaches heading to his funeral today. Ben and I will talk about that, the emotional toll that's taking, and what it means on the field as well for the Vikings, who suddenly find themselves down, not just not just his roster spot, but Mekhi Blackmon injured earlier this week, out for the season with a torn ACL. How that impacts them on the field, even if this is not by far the most important part of the story. We'll get into the quarterback situation as well, some kicker stuff, special teams. Everyone loves kickers and special teams, so we'll talk that as well. So stick around for that in just a minute. Got a Twins thought at the end of the show after reading a piece today by Bobby Nightingale Jr. and after reading a piece of email from a reader, a good, thoughtful email from a reader listener. I'll do that at the end of the show. First, though, what I miss, let us talk Gopher football at the jump here. Randy Johnson covering Gopher football, covering Big Ten Media Day down in Indianapolis, everybody's favorite gathering place, everybody's favorite conference meeting point. Lot going on in Indianapolis. PJ Fleck talked on Thursday. Randy Johnson and I will talk more about this next week as the Gophers start practice, but some remarks from PJ Fleck caught my ear, and I thought I wanted to run through some of them. I'm going to play one of them, the longer one. I'm going to read you a couple quotes from Randy's story that kind of helps kind of frame up where he is, where the program is, where college football is, frankly, in 2024 and beyond. So here's PJ Fleck. This was during a lengthy opening remarks to the media. Here's Fleck talking about just kind of like where they are after, a 5-7 year last year, some rumblings, some strong sense that he might be taking the UCLA job before he stayed here, building a house, about to move into that here in Minnesota, a new house, things of that nature.
And I think in 2024, it's okay to love where you're at. Like, it is okay to love Minnesota. It's okay to love the position that you're in. And I think we share that. We're actually building a house. It's finally finishing after 2.5 years, and we're moving in 2 weeks, which is great timing for a football coach to be moving his house. So I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. You got to ask Heather, because I probably won't be around to pull my weight on that one. But we both believe in the student-athlete experience, and I love that about working for Mark Coyle. So as we transition into this new world of college football, I just wanted to say something about our program that, we are a transformational program. Academically, athletically, socially, spiritually, the whole life program. But our world has changed in this transactional world with the NIL, with the portal, with salary caps, with obviously conference expansions, new TV deals. But really, the university experience is still there. And I think a lot of people think the transactional piece, now we all have to change into just the transactional piece. We don't believe in that. We believe in having the transactional piece as a piece that allows our student athletes to benefit, but you still get this transformational life program. And I think that's really important to talk about, because we're still educators, we're teachers, and we're mentors. And that'll never go away as we continue to move forward.
Now listen, Fleck is a good football coach, but he is even better at controlling or setting the narrative, the slogans, the expressions, comes out fast, comes out hard with his view of where things are in 2024 after the off season where a lot of stuff is happening, major ruling in college football. There's going to be, more paid out in NIL through the teams, through the schools coming up, big money changing hands, athletes getting paid, things like that. This is not the college football world that PJ Fleck entered. This isn't even the Gophers' job that he took. This isn't even the Gophers' job that he had in 2019, his one great season here. They've had other good seasons, but his one great season when they won 11 games, contended seriously for a Big Ten title, and for a while even potentially, if they had run the table that year, a spot in the college football playoff. Things have changed. The ground underneath all of college football is moving. PJ Fleck trying to kind of signal where that is right now. But I happen to like the narrative that he is selling right now. This kind of like, you got to appreciate where you are. It's okay to like where you're at. It's okay to love where you're at and not be constantly wondering about how it used to be or how it could be, focusing on the present. I do like that narrative. Two other things he said, one of them reinforcing that, one of them making me wonder, too, if he is trying to manage expectations in the context of living in the present. First thing he said about his job security, he's now the third longest tenured coach in the Big Ten. This is coming up on his 8th season with the Gophers. He said, "I will not win enough games at some point. Every head coach won't win enough games at some point." It's a coach that seemingly understands that even as he lives in the present, even as he says it's okay to love where you're at right now, he understands that's not entirely up to him. They went 5-7 in the regular season last year. Yes, they made it to a bowl game and won a bowl game. More on that in a minute. But that was not a good season by the standards that the program has set, by the standards that they had set, by where they were, with 4 or 5 games left in the year, controlling their destiny in the Big Ten West. Now, things have changed, obviously. The Big Ten West is no longer the schedule they had that was forgiving, that gave them a chance to compete with the 4 Pac-12 teams coming in, with the elimination of the divisions. The schedule's a lot harder. It just flat out is. You look at their schedule, you could see them, like Chip and I talked about earlier this week, Chip Scoggins talking about how they could be a better team this year and still win 5 games again just because the schedule is that much tougher. I think he recognizes that. He's not on the hot seat this year. I would not argue that he is or should be on the hot seat this year after one season of a dip where they go down, where they're not on that. The years before that, they'd had a bunch of 9-win, 11 wins in the seasons where it's the non-COVID seasons. They'd had a run of good seasons, sometimes great seasons. So one bad year shouldn't derail that. Even 2 years that fall short of expectations, if you feel like you're building up, shouldn't derail that. But it does feel like this is the year before the year. If it's another year like last year where just wins and losses, flat out wins and losses, you don't achieve what you want to, you could see the seat getting hot in 2025. And I think he realizes that. He's saying, we're not going to win enough games at some point. I recognize that. I get that. At the same time, the last thing he said, this is about 2024, he says, the narrative around our place right now is, well, what are you going to do after the disappointing year? We just won a bowl game. There are people here just trying to get to a bowl game for the first time in decades, talking about the Big Ten, and we won our 5th in a row. It's disappointing, but what we said at the beginning, when winning becomes disappointing, we're doing our job even better because there's going to be ebbs and flows. Yeah, I think he's managing expectations right here, right? Like he's saying that was still not, you can call it disappointing last year, but we won a bowl game. And I'm going to say, yeah, you won a bowl game because you got in as basically one of the very last teams because you were in good academic standing, not because of how you were performing on the field. Now, being in good academic standing is important, right? That's good. That is something we should celebrate. That is something that is definitely part of his program and will be, harder to sustain, I would imagine, as players even become more transient, as this becomes more of transactional, like he said before. Can they keep that experience going? Can they keep players here so that they stay on that track, so they get that experience? A lot of things coming together at once in college sports, in college football, in this Gophers program. I think PJ Fleck is trying to make sense of it all, just like we are. I think he's trying to live in the moment, to appreciate this for what it is, even as the ground moves underneath him, moves underneath anybody who follows college football. I don't think he's quite figured it all out yet, nor do all of us have it all figured out at this point. But I think 2024 is going to be an important and interesting season for his program.
Royal Credit Union's Smart Checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Enjoy financial freedom when you open your Royal Credit Union Smart Checking account online at rcu.org/go-checking. Insured by NCUA.
Let's bring in Ben Goessling, writes about the Vikings, of course, for the Star Tribune. Ben, we did an Access Vikings podcast a couple days ago. Felt like that might suffice for a little while. Then immediately after that, like Christian Darrisaw extension, Duke Shelley re-signs, which proves to be a prescient move because the day after that, Mekhi Blackman is lost for the season with a torn ACL. Jordan Addison talked for the first time Wednesday. They don't mind throwing a lot of news at us right away in camp, do they?
No, they do not. It's kind of off to a rip-roaring start to this point. And yes, the Mekhi Blackman news last night, first day of the acclimation period, goes down for the season with an ACL. That certainly adds to the day. Also, I think adds to their list of problems because Duke Shelley was brought back in part because they needed depth there. That's obviously an effect of Khyree Jackson's death. I think they needed help there regardless of that. And now not having Mekhi Blackman, I think that continues to be a pretty major area of need. So, yes, that's not the news they wanted to start camp. That's for sure.
I hate, we have to, but I hate talking about cornerback depth and just like how we just have to say, oh, yeah, and by the way, it is this way because Khyree Jackson died. It just feels like such a weird aside. It's true. This is the football impact of it. But like, there's no good way to say it other than just to say it. But that is definitely impacting what they want to do at that position right now.
Yeah, it is. And it reduces the loss of a life to a spot on a football roster, which
like
is
body. Yeah, I don't like that.
It's trivial and stupid and, not fully capturing the loss that happened there, obviously.
Right.
But football it goes on, and they did make the plan, for the year based on, okay, we drafted him. You assume, barring something like that you're going to have those players, and then you have to respond to it when you don't. Injuries are of a different nature, but you now deal with that with Mekhi Blackman as well, where they were probably expecting him to compete for a role, maybe a starting spot. And you have to go back to, right now it's Duke Shelley and the two members of the 2022 draft class that are kind of in make or break years.
Yes.
Yeah, Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth. So I would think they would look for another solution there. Xavier Howard comes up a lot. We'll see if that is something that comes together. But there's for a lot of different reasons a need in that spot. And the football side of that is certainly a pretty significant component of the whole thing.
Well, and the flip side of it, the more personal side of it, that's certainly more important, will become front and center again Friday, the funeral, right? And a large contingent of, the Vikings, coaches, personnel group, stuff like that, heading out to that, right?
Yes. Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, Brian Flores, Durante Jones, Matt Daniels. So basically all of their coordinators, other than Wes Phillips, all of the coordinators that would have interacted with him, I think would probably be the way to say it. Position coach, obviously, was his position coach, Kevin O'Connell, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, of course, who drafted him. So large showing from the Vikings. They're flying out there for the funeral, and I think Wes Phillips will kind of be the head coach on the scene that day.
Makes sense.
They're still going through practice. I believe their contingent is flying back Friday. I'm sure they're probably taking a private plane out there, so they have probably a little more control over their schedule than if you're flying commercial. Certainly, if you're flying in and out of Minneapolis right now, I don't think they would want to be putting their hands on the schedule of the predominant airline in this market who charters the Vikings for the season, but you probably don't want to be resting on that at the moment. So, I believe they are flying back Friday, but I don't believe they'll be back in time for practice. So But yes, they're going to be out there to pay their respects to Khyree Jackson, to be there in support of his family. And, it'll be, I think, a pretty somber day. It's not something that anybody's expecting to do, first week into training camp. But yes, that's, they felt it was important to be there. And I certainly commend them for that. I think it's a nice gesture on their part to do what they're doing. And, that's where a lot of the decision makers will be on Friday.
On the football side of it, we talked about Duke Shelley coming back. It strikes me as odd, this kind of like progression, right? Because I thought he was pretty good for them in 2022. Like, this is kind of like, the thirsty person in the desert, and then you see like even a small glass of water, right? Like that was not a good year for cornerbacks, not a good year for cornerback play. They had Donatel defense, things like that. But I thought he, especially in that Buffalo game, the New England game, had some real highlight plays. Says he never wanted to leave. Vikings certainly seemed like they had a need last year. Like why? Yeah. But then, maybe the thinking at that point is, hey, new scheme, new system. Does he really fit into the Flores defense? Well, he's back now, so he must. Like why? What was the kind of disconnect between bringing back Duke Shelley last year and then now bringing him back this year?
Well, it'll be interesting to hear from Brian Flores on that. We haven't had a chance to do that yet. But yeah, I mean, my initial thought is just that it was not as good of a scheme fit. I mean, you want corners probably that are a little bit bigger in the Flores defense. And that's probably more important this year, even more so than it was last year, perhaps, because they're planning to play more man coverage. So why is he back now? That question still remains. He's not any taller. He's not any bigger.
No, I don't think so.
No, he's not.
He had a great offseason of growing. He grew 4 inches.
No, we saw him yesterday. He's
still Duke Shelley.
Days of growing 4 inches in an offseason. That probably stops when you're 14 or 15 or something. Right. But yes, he was the same Duke Shelley. Excited to be here. He said it felt like home. Certainly wanted to be back here. And I think, he's going to give you what he has. And he definitely is the type of corner that likes to challenge receivers, even if he's not a big guy. He likes to play physically, he likes to get up in receivers' faces. So I think in that sense it fits. But yeah, you may end up in a spot where you say, well, let's look at our options here because you have to. And I wonder if that was part of where they landed here. I'll be curious to hear Brian Flores weigh in a little more on that, which we'll get a chance to do here fairly soon. I don't think it solves the whole problem, but certainly a guy that they have liked and have seen good things from in the past. And we'll see kind of what he's able to do in this defense because they need options there in a pretty big way, I think.
Same day they brought him back, the bigger news was the Christian Darrisaw extension. 4 years up to $113 million, you reported, which if he hits all those markers could make it the highest, the highest value contract for an offensive lineman. Now you see Trent Williams holding out with the 49ers. So good to get that done, I guess, and not get in the same situation, although it'd be a little bit different because what they Darrisaw still had 2 years left on the fourth and then the 5th year option, right?
Yes, which is what made this a little bit of not a surprise, but out of the normal step of how these things go.
There was no hurry.
No, there was no hurry. O'Connell said it, and Darrisaw even talked about it when he addressed it on Tuesday, I believe. But the thing he talked about was. I guess it was on Wednesday that he talked.
Wednesday,
They're already running together. It happens every training camp.
It's been a long camp already.
Yes, it has. Yesterday was a long week. One of the things he said, though, is that watching what happened with Justin Jefferson last year when he tried to get a deal done with 2 years left and it didn't happen, in part because there's no real trigger to do it, he thought, well, these things take time. I'm not sure if it's going to happen. I mean, ordinarily, the Vikings, in my 13 years of covering them, I'm trying to think how many times they have done deals 2 years out. Harrison Smith got one. I think the big surge of players in 2018 that they wanted to kind of get in front of all of it. There might have been a couple of like an Everson Griffin or a Linval Joseph
Okay.
in there. It's not often that guys get deals done a year early. So in part, Darisaw is thinking, well, this is going to be a lot of money. This is going to be a lot to figure out. So am I going to get this done 2 years earlier, or are we going to wait a year?
Mm-hmm.
And they come to a price that everybody agrees with and everybody's happy with. And yes, if he hits all of the markers in it, he will be the highest paid left tackle in the NFL. It passes Penei Sewell in Detroit, who got $28 million a year earlier this offseason. So yeah, big deal for him. Big for the Vikings to get him locked up.
Yeah.
He has had some injuries, still has not played a full 17-game season, had 15 last year, which I believe is a career high. So they still need to see probably a little more durability from him to say that we are getting our full value of this deal. But they obviously love his physicality. They love what he does as a pass protector, certainly one of the higher graded pass protectors in the NFL. And he's also a guy that can get out and get in front of a screen and get in front of some of the run plays that they want if they want to run outside as well. And we've seen that at times during his career. I can remember, I think it was a screenplay where he just obliterated, I think, 2 guys on the play. And yeah, he has the athletic ability to do that. So when you have that and you have Brian O'Neill on the other side, it's like, let's make sure we have all of this locked up so that JJ McCarthy can basically grow up knowing that you're going to have the same tackles for at least the next several years of your development in Minnesota.
Ironic, given how hit and miss the first round picks were, how hit and miss the offensive line was in the Spielman era, that Darisaw was his last first round pick, right?
Yes. Yeah. It is funny because there were so many years there where they either hadn't done it. I mean, because we would write this every year. It was, and I can remember the statistic. It was since 2009 when they took Phil Lodeholt, they have not used a pick higher than the 3rd round on an offensive lineman. And then they take Brian O'Neill in 2018 to end that streak.
Right.
Garrett Bradbury in 2019 is a first round pick. Darisaw is 2021. Well, I'm missing one. Ezra Cleveland.
Yeah. Was a second rounder.
The second round pick, I believe, in 2020.
That sounds right. Yeah.
And he was traded away. They initially planned for him to be the left tackle, but then quickly moved him to guard, where Riley Reef stayed at left tackle a little bit longer, and then they take Darisaw in 21. So yes, the investments on the offensive line. Ed Ingram was a second round pick as well. So there have been a lot of investments in that group, and did all of those guys hit over the years? No. I guess Spielman probably would be quick to tell you, and if we were talking to him, I'm sure he would point out the fact that they still have 3 starters on that line that he drafted for all of the grief he took over the years. So we can give him that. I think the fact that they got the tackles, it looks like they got the tackles right, and got the tackle right.
Get it right. That's a good Spielman line too. Get right.
That's right. Yes, going back to 2014.
Adrian Peterson. Yeah.
Yep. That was the phrase they all rallied around on the second day of that press conference after putting him on the commissioner's exempt list.
I did a video remix. I did a video remix that year of how many times they said "get it right," and I don't think it was very well received by the Vikings.
Probably not. No. That whole week was. That's that was 10 years ago this fall.
Yeah, 20. Yeah, that's right. Jeez. Okay. Sorry. We kind of derailed that talk. But yes, offensive line. I wouldn't say any of those guys were disasters, right? Like, even the guys that didn't quote unquote hit, like, Garrett Bradbury, for all we complain about him getting bowled over by all the interior rushers by the Bears and Packers over the years, he's still a starter in the league. Ezra Cleveland is still playing in this league. O'Neill and Darisaw, of course, they hit on, and it kind of is what it is with some of those guys, but Ingram is still in the mix, at least. Like, you don't hit on all of those guys. I wouldn't say it's a better than average probably track record for those for that group.
Well, and the thing with Darisaw to point out too is that he traded back in that draft. I mean,
13 to 23, right?
14th, and he came back to 23, and that was the draft where there were all of those pass rushers that Zimmer liked. It was James Phillips and Kwity Paye, and there was another one in there. I mean, just look at the guys that went from 14 to 23. there were a lot of players that Zimmer liked, and he talked afterwards about, like, I'm going to take his phone away if he tries to trade back one more time. I think there were some animated moments in the draft room that night, and then the next day they take Kellen Mond, which was the beginning of the end
the third round.
Zimmer-Spielman relationship.
Because I see him every day.
The fact that he was able to see him every day. The fact that he was still able to trade back from 14 to 23 and get his guy was a good read on the situation. Now, they didn't get a lot else out of that draft, but he got the Darisaw pick right. I mean, really, two of his last three first rounders in Minnesota are Justin Jefferson and Christian Darisaw, and both those guys got massive contracts this season. So there is part of the foundation that they have offensively that certainly was due to Rick Spielman's last couple of drafts in Minnesota.
Yes, and arguably the most successful pick of the new regime was Jordan Addison, who we heard from on Wednesday for the first time since his arrest on suspicion of DWI a couple weeks ago in California. Opening up a little bit about how hard it was on him. He was in a dark place. Didn't quite get all of the "this will never happen again" kind of sentiment from him, but maybe that's honest too. Maybe it's just saying, hey, look, I'm a work in progress. I'm sure he doesn't want anything like this to ever happen again, but maybe coming up short of guaranteeing it caught me a little off guard.
Yeah. I think it's certainly, I mean, he got asked, how can you guarantee this will never happen again? I think was the exact question. And he said, taking it a day at a time. So that's, not, planting a flag of this will never, ever, ever happen again. But he did talk about, I need to make better decisions. I'm learning about that in this process. I mean, players have access to car services that basically, I mean, it's almost like a private Uber. I mean, you can call car services and they'll pick you up. And basically, I think players often are worried about using those. And I'm not speaking specifically about Addison here, just in general, because it's this thing of, is the team going to find out that I called this?
Right.
Is it going to look bad on me that I was in a spot where I needed a driver? My understanding is that doesn't happen with these. There's a layer of the team does not know about it. The team does not track the records of it that is meant to not put players in the spot where they're reluctant to use these kinds of things. So the team is, it's good for you. It's good for us. Use them. They're there for you. And obviously beyond that, I mean, Uber and Lyft are always options as well. Now, there's the matter of what you do with your car, those spots. But, you figure that out.
Especially a Rolls Royce. You don't want to leave that just anywhere.
No, you don't. So there's probably part of that goes into it as well. But, it's one of those things where as he goes through this, the decision-making process there is obviously use the options that you have. And he kind of acknowledged that. He said, whatever discipline comes my way, I'll face it. I'll own up to it. The legal process will play out first, I think, and then the NFL will probably make its decisions from there. And then the Vikings probably react to whatever would happen from the NFL. My assumption is that whatever the NFL does will probably be the extent of the punishment he faces, but that may still be a little ways from coming to fruition. Just because the legal process still has a little ways to go, as far as I have understood it from checking in with people out in LA this week.
Got to gather that information. Vikings are also gathering information on their quarterbacks. How's JJ looking? A couple days in.
He looked good yesterday. I mean, we saw him, throughout the kind of the acclimation practice. So it's still not
acclimation practice. What are the names they come up with for these things?
Yeah. It's just so that it's not as long as a full practice. Okay. They basically put limits on it as part of the CBA. It's kind of where these things come from. But he made some nice throws yesterday. Certainly has been working. You can see him working on some of the footwork things that they want him to do. Without getting terribly nuanced with it, a lot of what they want him to change in his drop back is basically just make everything look the same. You don't want to get to the point where defenders can read your footwork and say, okay, if it's a quick pass, he does this versus intermediate throw, longer throw. They felt like there's some things for him to clean up there. And that's a lot of what they want him to do in this process. So you could see him working through some of those things yesterday. I think there's signs of progress. I'm not a scout, nor do I play one on television or on podcasts, but
right.
Some of the things that you have conversations with people that they kind of say, hey, here's what we're looking for. You kind of know to look for that. And you see some of the work there. He made a couple of nice throws yesterday. So I think it was a good first day for him overall. Sam Darnold had kind of the highlight of the day, and the Vikings have wasted little time posting a clip of it.
Yeah.
The deep ball he hit to Justin Jefferson, which it was an impressive play. I mean, certainly it was a big time throw. You would expect that a guy that was picked number 3 overall has the arm talent to make that throw. So, I think you kind of take that for what it is. He's not being rushed. He's not in a full contact live situation. But yeah, it was impressive and certainly was the highlight of the day on day one. Justin Jefferson looked pretty excited about it. And we'll see where that goes, but
yeah,
a good start, at least from a creating some buzz perspective for Sam Darnold.
Covered by Andrew Booth Jr. on the play, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, also receiving votes at this point for playing time.
Yeah. I think the other person that will receive votes for playing time is the field. Not on roster yet. I would be very much expecting that they look for additional help at that spot. So I think you could, if you're placing bets on that spot, taking the field is probably not a bad option, just because I would imagine, and we've seen this in the past where they kind of add the veteran corner in training camp if they find one that they like. I mean, Xavier Howard, we'll have to see if that is the way that they would go if the prices match up and everything. But he has played well for Brian Flores before. Yeah. So we'll see if that ends up being the solution. But I would expect they'd continue to look there.
Early in camp, and obviously this is not a question that's based on anything we've seen in camp yet, but could that player be taking a roster spot formerly occupied by Lewis Cine? Is Lewis Cine going to make the 53-man this year?
I would not assume that he will. Okay. The tricky thing there is, I mean, if he does, I could see an argument based on special teams, because the special team stuff now changes a little bit in the sense that you want guys that can run. I mean, you always want guys that can run on special teams, but those guys that can play a little more open field style.
Right.
If you are expecting more returns and it's going to be a little more of a rugby style play, I think is the read on it at this point, but without having seen it actually play out in an NFL game. I could see that, and I'm curious to hear from Matt Daniels kind of about where he's thinking, kind of what he needs as a shopping list on special teams at this point with these new rules with the kickoff. I could see that. There's always the fact that you're a first-round pick, which means you tend to get more opportunities because people want to be right about you. Now, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I think, to his credit, so far has been pretty good at saying, we tried this, it didn't work, and we can move on from it. We'll see if that happens with a first-round pick. But you do see a little more of that in his approach than perhaps other GMs that we were referencing earlier.
Previous regimes. Yeah.
Yes. Other GMs that we were referencing earlier in this podcast with their first-round picks. They were first-round picks that did not work, that got lots of chances as well. So, I think, does he make the team? There's enough safeties here that I think it's in question. I really do. I think his best play may be special teams. I don't know that it's going to happen for him at safety, at least as they're currently set up. And the other thing to consider is, this may be an indirect impact, but when you're counting to 53, every spot matters.
Yeah.
I can't see a way there's not 3 quarterbacks on the active roster.
Yes, just because of the way they're aligned right now.
Yes, you cannot cut J.J. McCarthy, obviously.
Of course not. Yeah.
Because you'd expose him to waivers, and nobody's going to try that.
Yeah.
Sam Darnold and Nick Mullins, I expect will be here. I suppose you could trade, and I'm not saying this is going to happen for anybody who's listening and looking for Twitter engagement off of it, but maybe you would get to a spot where you'd say, well, if we need a roster spot, we can trade one of these guys.
Okay. Like Mullins, right?
McCarthy I mean, you'd have to feel so good about McCarthy that you're willing to put him into the mix where he's either starting or one snap away. So if you want to control this process to the degree that I think they do, I think there's 3 quarterbacks on the roster. So
that makes sense to me.
What does that mean? It means that there's one less spot for somebody else. And when you're making those decisions on the final spot, those things do come into play, where if you take 2 quarterbacks and then you have your third on the practice squad, you have a little more wiggle room. I don't think it's going to work this way this year. So it does make something somewhere a little tighter, and maybe it's that spot. So I think it's very much an open question as to whether Lewis is on this team.
Final thing, you brought up the new kickoff rules. It's got to be thinking it's a big year for Matt Daniels. The new rules, new kicker. I mean, there's a lot kind of on his plate after the special teams were not great last year. If you looked at the DVOA and stuff like that, it was like offense was okay, defense was okay, special teams not all that great. So how do you think that's going to shake out this year? The kicker, trying a new SEC kicker, it doesn't always work out.
This is attempt number 3 on an SEC kicker. Now, I suppose the response to that from, again, the person that drafted the first 2 would be, well, that they both have been to Pro Bowls in their career.
It's true.
Yes. One went to a Pro Bowl before he missed a significant playoff kick and was never the same. The second went to a Pro Bowl after missing 3 kicks at Lambeau Field that got him cut in week 2 of his rookie year. He's been a very good kicker for the Las Vegas Raiders since then. Yes, the third attempt at this with Will Reichard. We'll see how this goes. He looked great in the spring. I mean, he checks the leg strength box and then some. I mean, we saw some kicks. It's like that would have gone into the first couple of rows of the stands if there wasn't a net back there. But how that goes, can he do it when it's real pressure and real situations? I mean, he kicked at Alabama, so it's you think he's been in enough big games and kicking for Nick Saban, I can't imagine is the most forgiving environment in the world. That's about as well as you can prepare yourself for the NFL, but we'll see how that goes when he is in an actual situation. And then, the new special teams stuff with the kickoff rules is fascinating to me because there seem like there are so many different ways that teams could go about this. And there will probably be kind of a best practice that gets formulated throughout the course of the season and maybe even in the offseason. You're going to start to see teams kind of do the same things because everybody's going to be watching everybody else and seeing what people do. But trying to study film, trying to prepare for opponents when you do that stuff, trying to figure out your own advantages, how your kickoff returners are lined up on your roster, I think becomes a bigger deal again. I like it. I mean, it's unorthodox, but the NFL has not wanted to get rid of that play completely. And we were certainly moving toward a place where if there wasn't this kind of a change, it would have made sense to just get rid of it because it got to the point where I think the NFL has said only 23% of kickoffs were returned last year. I mean, it basically becomes the touchback was almost so automatic that you're like, why are we wasting 3 minutes of real time on this play, coming out of it, commercial coming out of it, commercial probably going into it after the extra point.
Right.
I think in a game time perspective, it would have made sense to just get rid of it if you weren't going to do something to try to revive it. And they have said, we want the play to be in the game. The safety concerns, they're hoping this will alleviate a lot of those because you're not going to have players running full steam for 30 yards perhaps before they are coming into contact with each other in basically head-on situations. So I'm not 100% convinced that people won't just say, you know what, we're going to kick the ball through the end zone and deal with the fact that it's at the 30, not the 25.
Right.
They talked about making it 35 for a touchback, but they decided on the 30 for now. We'll see if that changes if they don't get the results they want because of this. But if, in fact, there are more kickoffs, I like it. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it develops, and just watching how different teams go about it, I think is going to be fascinating, because it is a third phase of the game that can change a lot. We've seen that over the years with Vikings returners, and we've certainly seen it done to them,
right?
Largely by the man that's heading into the Hall of Fame here next week, Devin Hester. So it does have a real impact on the game, and I'm curious to see how this plays out.
Speaking of having a real impact on the game, Ben Goessling, thanks for joining me today. Talk again soon, all right?
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Great stuff from Ben. Just a reminder to follow all of his coverage from training camp, StarTribune.com, as well as our other Vikings writers and columnists who are out there. Ben and I planning to record another Access Vikings podcast next week, kind of bringing you up to date on everything else that's happening in camp. Yes, how's JJ looking, all that good stuff. We'll get more of a representative sample size as camp goes on. Let us finish with the coolers. A couple things. Bobby Nightingale Jr. wrote an interesting piece today about the Twins at the trade deadline, how this year is different for them. In the past, they have targeted players at the trade deadline who have more years left on their contract, not just looking for rentals who are going to be there for 2 or 3 months, looking for players who are maybe have a defined contract under team control or on a team-friendly deal for maybe a year or 2 years beyond the year that they're acquiring them for in the middle of the season. So they hopefully have some kind of plan sketched out for future seasons. This year is different, he says, because of payroll expectations. Next year, they're going to have a lot of players who get raises because of natural young players at arbitration. They already have a bunch of high-priced contracts like Carlos Correa, Pablo Lopez, Byron Buxton. Their top 5 earners next year will already get them to about $90 million in payroll. Bunch of other guys getting raises will take them to about the point where the payroll is this year already, 125, 130, somewhere in that range. So with the TV stuff still unsettled, they might be looking at more of a rental this year. I got someone who's only going to be here for 2 months as opposed to someone who's here long term, because then you aren't on the hook for salary in 2025 and beyond. Another interesting nugget from what he wrote, he's got a good piece, kind of lays out who they might be targeting. You can read that in the Star Tribune and on StarTribune.com. He lays out who they're targeting, but also saying if they're going to acquire anybody, they probably have to send out salary in addition to even taking back just a little bit of salary, because, of course, when you acquire a player, you're only paying them for the last couple months of the year for what they are making right now. So interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way for 2025 and beyond. Guys they've acquired in the past have certainly fit that mold, even if they haven't been mid-year acquisitions, even if they've been guys who were deeper down, deeper in the offseason. Pablo Lopez, Sonny Gray. You weren't just looking for 1 year, you were looking for 2 in most cases, and that has been their MO at the trade deadline. Might not be their MO this year simply because of salary constraints. That will do it for me today. Expecting to be back with Royce on Monday next week. Probably taking a little bit of a break in the middle of the week to take some vacation time. Should be shows at the end of the week, I think Thursday and Friday, but probably no shows on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. But yes, Royce and I on Monday to talk about the weekend and everything that happens from now until then. Enjoy yours. We'll be back at it Monday. We'll see you then.